Okay, and I believe we are live. Hey, everybody, it's Uncle Grumpy, and welcome to Grumpy Tonight. As you can see, I'm here with my friend, Dr. Lawrence Pasternack. Lawrence, how you doing tonight?
Oh, I am doing all right. Today was my first day back on campus for a year and a half.
Wow.
So
what
it
did
was
what did you do on campus?
well, the new president of the university, Dr. Schramm, was visiting one of the sections of the freshman religious studies class, Religion 1103 World Religions, and I just felt as the director, it was appropriate for me to be there just to welcome her. And so basically that was why I was
like
there.
an elbow rubbing thing where you just elbow rubbing, just smoozing with the big people at the campus and getting your face in the paper. Is that it?
It was bowing, actually. We bowed.
Bowing.
Yeah, we
Okay.
bowed. So,
Bowing to the
yeah,
powers that be. That's
right.
good.
So I said hello to the new president of OSU and had a little bit of chit chat and talked to the advisor for religious studies, the undergraduate advisor, just to talk about some strategizing for advertising and pamphlets and just the kind of work that you do as an administrator, that sort of thing.
All right. Well, I know you've been doing more than just that today because I've gotten you on the phone for, I think we've killed at least a couple hours so far today on the phone talking about petitions. I see we've got, looks like about 8 or 9 people watching. Let's go ahead and get into it. Some of you came to the meeting on Saturday and heard about the petitions. I see we've got, sorry. Looks like about 8 or 9 people. Hit that button. All right. Anyway, some of you came to the meeting. Hey, Joshua, I see you're watching. But I know a lot of you couldn't make it. So we're trying to bring as much attention to this as possible. We feel like Jed might be coming to a point soon where he's going to want to file these. And we have some concerns about the community waking up the day after they're filed and having issue with some of what's in there. So we're trying to do everything we can to get everybody to pay as much attention as possible. So please, if you haven't yet, read the petitions. If you have and you've got a problem with them, let us know about it, or let Jed or the people at ORCA know about it. That'd be even better. And maybe we can address some of that. But Lawrence, I know you've got a list of some things you want to talk about, and I don't just want to talk about the negative. I'm probably going to concentrate a little more than some might like on the negative, but I think somebody needs to. So since they call me Grumpy, I'm going to see what I can do to uphold that name in this particular case. So we'll let you try and sell us with some of these good things that are in there, and then we'll argue about some of the things I have issue with.
Sure. To begin, Joshua is asking us to drop a link to the petitions. So I put up the link to the ORCA website, but as of this weekend, the links on the ORCA website to the petitions were not still updated. So here is the link to the live document for people to look at on Google Docs. So that's the link to the rec. And now let me put up the link to the medical. There you go. So through these two links, you guys could look at the existing language as it is, that is very, very close to being filed. My understanding from Jed is that he is taking this language, for the medical language, to legal this week. And then once he hears from them, he plans on filing it next week, I suppose. And for the full access, there's a couple last minute tweaks left. And then taking it to legal and filing. So, this could get delayed, but my sense is that we are just about a week out from it being officially filed. So if any of you do have input for Jed, it's just a matter of days really left.
Has he told you who legal is? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Lawrence, but has he told you who legal is?
I don't know which attorneys he's using.
Okay. I'd
Yeah.
like to know. but-
And I've been talking with a number of different cannabis attorneys all the way along, getting independent input. And I get very mixed advice, which is kind of helpful, right? To see how different the perspectives are from two separate cannabis attorneys on issues, which we'll definitely be talking about. Thank you for sharing, Joshua. And, definitely, as we go through this, please post your questions, see what we can answer. And insofar as you have any issues with language, send them to the comment section on the ORCA website. There absolutely are a lot of details in here that people debate. This weekend, for instance, during our town hall, we really didn't even get through the whole thing because we got stuck for 20, 30 minutes on just one particular issue or another. That there's so much in here that there's just lots of varying opinions about it.
Well, that's one of the reasons, Lawrence, that's one of the reasons why I've been encouraging everybody to try and read this on their own. We've got to stop going over this one line at a time from the beginning, because as we did the other day, we don't have 10 hours in a day. I know you've made it clear that you think that's what is required to do this right, and I'm sure you're right in that. But we're not going to get that, and we don't keep people's attention that long. So we really need to concentrate a little more rather than just reading line by line on some of the issues people have and some of the things they find wrong with it, or we never even get to those things.
Yeah.
So,
well, part of my
go ahead.
problem, I'm sure a lot of people share, is that if this is going to go into the Constitution, then it has to be damn good, right? And for it to be damn good, there's always going to be controversies and disagreements with, sure. But it has to be done with such care that 10 hours on every line is, I kind of think, appropriate. And that this is, Facebook Live is not the venue for that. But, really, for a constitutional amendment that would be hard to change, it doesn't mean it's impossible. It'll be as easy and as hard to change it as it is to put it into the Constitution to begin with. But what we're talking about is a $500,000 to $1 million venture with hundreds and hundreds of man hours to get a petition going. So we really have to have excellent language.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. You said you think he's pretty much wrapped it up with the medical petition. Is that right? And you think that's going to legal and then getting done? Let me ask you, does it still have in there that the doctors will have to get a permit after writing 100 recommendations, take that education course and pay, what is it? I think $500 for that permit.
Yes, last I looked, at least, which was a couple days ago, but I could check right now.
Okay. Have you gotten much feedback about that? I've talked to two different doctors or two different nurses who work directly with doctors about this. And so that's the feedback I've gotten. Have you gotten any?
Yep. So yeah, it has it at $500 with 4 hours of education, and physicians or medical practitioners can write up to 100 without. So I've talked to a couple physicians about it. And so what the medical does is it expands those who can write recommendations to any medical practitioner with prescriptive authority. So that would be obviously doctors, but as well as that, nurse practitioners and physician assistants. And so that will probably triple or quadruple or quintuple the number of people in the state of Oklahoma who will be able to write recommendations. So that's obviously a huge boon. However, what it also says is that all these practitioners, the first 100 recommendations that they write, no problem, just like it is now. After 100 recommendations, you're going to be required to have 4 hours of education in cannabis medicine. And you'll have to register basically with OMA, or the new version of OMA, with a $500 fee.
Now, everybody's reaction on Saturday wasn't too good necessarily to this. but none of them that were in there are doctors. So, you know, that it would help that we ask doctors. What feedback have you gotten? Because the feedback I've gotten, I'll tell you, has not been positive. But what have you
Yeah.
got?
Just to answer a question from Jules Dewey, who asks, would that hurt their ability to write prescriptions for other medications? Technically, no. There is nothing whatsoever in law at all that would interfere. This was adjudicated in 2002 in a Ninth Circuit court case, Conant v. Walters, where the court determined that it is fully within the First Amendment rights of a doctor to recommend cannabis. And actually, in a good number of medical states, about a half dozen medical states, all that happens is the patient is given a form by the doctor that the patient takes to the dispensary. There's no state agency that you got to go through. So, you know, it's kind of a myth that doctors have to be really careful about it becoming a prescription and so forth. That's really a legal myth, that the only thing that doctors can't do is, based upon that court decision, aid and abet in the acquisition of cannabis. So those states that have the doctor fill out a form that you take to the dispensary, that actually makes the doctors aiding and abetting, because that means there's a direct causal relationship. But prosecuted, nobody's acting on it. And so even though there is this fear within the medical community, practically speaking, it's of no consequence. It hasn't been of any consequence. Now, what's the feedback I've been getting from doctors? Well, one of the doctors that I talked to, he thought that it is absolutely ridiculous that doctors are writing recommendations if they don't know enough about cannabis. He thought that doctors absolutely should have the training in cannabis to write these recommendations, and they don't get that training in medical school. So he's 100% behind the medical education. And he didn't like the $2,500 license fee that they used to have, but shrugged off the $500 fee as not a big deal. So one doctor that I talked to, he thought that overall he supported it. He would like the license to just be $1, just as a kind of token. Yeah, I'm proving to you that I have this education, and that's all that they need to do. So $500, I don't know why it's $500, but he strongly thought that doctors shouldn't be writing these recommendations. And that's the way it is in most medical programs. In most medical programs, doctors are required to have a certain number of hours of education on cannabis medicine before they write. So that's one opinion that I got.
Yes, but most of those, all those also have qualifying conditions. So the doctor's involvement, in my opinion, is a little more substantial when the doctor has to verify that you have conditions that qualify you for that. The way I see this, if we're not going to ask anything out of the patients, meaning no qualifying conditions, then we can't ask anything out of the doctors either. That's the way I see it. Now, I spoke with a nurse who's doing this with her husband right now. I'm not going to drop anybody's names without checking with them first, but it's somebody who's been doing it in the community. So they've written quite a few. They laughed at the idea. They said, you want to attach schooling to it, you need to do it through and we talked about it a little bit, through the doctors' boards, through their standard education, the way it is now. It needs to be added to that. And they didn't really like the fee. When I talked to the girl that the representative that is doing, that has this implant in my back, the lady I message with all the time that's doing this, you guys know I have this here. I can show you here. I have this implant in my back and I have this battery here, which powers it. So I've gone to this pain management doctor to get this implant. And one of the first things he said when he found out what I do was, when my card expires, let him know he'll write my recommendation for free. He does it for all of his patients because he believes in the medicine. When I talked to the nurse, the girl who I talked to about my implant over this weekend about this permit, and I had her contact him about it, and they talked and got back to me. It was a lot of back and forth. They couldn't understand what I was talking about. They couldn't figure out why anyone would even want to charge them to get this permit. They're doing it already. They didn't understand the reasoning at all. When I finally got them to understand this was going in a new petition to go in the Constitution, they were totally against it.
Mhm.
So the two, I've only had two, but the two I've followed up with are not in support at all.
One issue that I have is that I want to see this more normalized rather than marginalized. And so, if you're able to go to your doctor, your regular doctor, and say, doctor, can you recommend cannabis for me? Then if the doctor says, oh, gee, there's this licensing and there's these courses I got to take, I'm sorry, it's just too much for me. Just find, one of those online telemed doctors. And I really think that this is going to alienate a lot of doctors, even though they could write 100, right? So for some doctors, we'll say, sure, I'll do the 100. But some doctors, it's already sketchy for them, and it just might make them more comfortable. On the other hand, the medical education strikes me as truly important, because there are some things that cannabis can do to a person that aren't good, right? Interfere with the uptake of folic acid for pregnant women, just as one example, right? Increase the interlocular pressure. CBD can increase the interlocular pressure, and so on.
Look, Lawrence, I can give you the education is necessary. I completely agree with that. But don't they do standard yearly continual education anyway? Shouldn't it be part of that? Should we be putting in the Constitution that doctors have to get educated in cannabis? Is that where it goes?
So in law, there are certain CME requirements, not in the Constitution, but in statute, there are certain CME requirements for instance, for pain management. So, I'm not that adverse to the expectation of CME training for cannabis recommenders, but I agree that it seems like there's something awkward about it in the Constitution, because hopefully even now medical school training is getting updated to include cannabis education. And, once it's in a regular medical curriculum, then all these other bits of like having to do this further education just doesn't seem quite as appropriate. And furthermore, you would hope that your doctor was responsible enough that if he's going to be engaging in this practice, he knows what he's doing. So,
yeah. Believe me, when the doctor told me about it, he came at me with information. He didn't just come at me with me and say, hey, you want to get high? He talked about how it helps his patients, and we got into a long conversation about some of the miracles he's seen with the cannabis plant. So the education is good, and I think you're right. Those that want to do it are probably getting educated already, or at least will be soon. I just think.
So I strongly
Go ahead.
So I strongly support the education. I am just not confident that we need to put it into law.
I agree. All right. Well, if that one's going to the lawyers soon for final approval, everybody reach out to ORCA and to Jed and tell them what you think about that. See, Josh is asking for contact information. I think you might just need to send that to ORCA, right? And isn't that up? Didn't you put that up?
Yeah. So there's a place to put in your feedback on the ORCA website. So, I guess the education is one part of it. Maybe just one other thought is that if a patient had a complaint against a doctor who's writing recommendations, then they could go to the medical board already, right? So they could already go to the medical board and issue that complaint. It's very possible the medical board wouldn't even want to touch it because it relates to cannabis and it's just a recommendation versus a prescription. And so it kind of falls outside of what the medical board normally does. So just one other thought is that if you have a licensing structure for doctors and a patient has a complaint against a doctor, that would then make the licensing agency the place to go to issue a complaint. So that's one other factor to bear in mind, that it might allow for further scrutiny on the part of doctors, on the part of patients, I suppose, with regards to those doctors.
Okay, well, like I said, I'm concerned it would hurt access. I see. I think Daryl Carnes is concerned about the same thing. Thank you for joining us, Daryl. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm not happy with that. I hope everybody contacts Jed. I hope he rethinks that before he submits that to legal. All right, what do you got?
And
next?
I noticed Daryl earlier said something about about it being perceived as a prescription if an IDC code is added. So there's just so much misunderstanding. There's nothing wrong with the doctor writing a prescription for cannabis in a certain sense. A doctor could say, take 3 joints of White Widow 4 times a day, and he's not violating any law at all. The law actually is that the doctor cannot aid and abet the acquisition of cannabis. So a doctor could say, take something with 7% THC and 4% CBD 3 times a day. He can say anything he wants. The only thing that he can't do is provide an instrument that provides a direct causal relationship for the patient to get that cannabis. That's the only thing, legally speaking, the doctor can't do.
Okay, let me ask you this, Lawrence.
Paper.
Let's look not even that far in the future. Okay. Over the last, say, 5 years, I personally have gone from believing cannabis is just something people get high on to understanding its medical value. And I've used it most of my life. Most of us have learned enormous things in just the last few years. Do you think in 5 or let's go out a little farther, let's say in 10 years, do you believe that all doctors will be getting some training in cannabis at that point? Because at that point, the feds will have changed. The other states will have gotten on board. It'll pretty much be tomatoes at that point. Do you think the doctors will be getting trained at that point properly from the get-go?
Can I use a hyperbolic analogy here?
Okay.
In World War II, the Nazis burned all of the research that was published by Jewish scientists. It was Jew science, and they destroyed all the research of German Jewish scientists. They banned it, they burned it, and they destroyed it. A government with an ideology destroyed knowledge, suppressed knowledge. That is the United States with regards to cannabis and mushrooms and so many other plant-based medicines. They actively have suppressed and destroyed knowledge for decades. And so how much longer is that going to go on for? It's hard to say, because it's the government, it's the medical establishment that's party to it, that this is the nature of our body, includes an endocannabinoid system. And just think about this, right? It is one of the most important aspects of our physical system.
Okay, so don't you think, hold on. So let's try and bring it back to cannabis, okay? And what we're trying to talk about here. So don't you think there that because of everything you've just said, that doctors are going to be getting training in this soon, and that it will be regular practice soon, within the next 10 years? Enough to say that maybe we don't need to put this in the Constitution.
Right. My thought is that it's harder than we might realize to overcome, right, the institutional biases against cannabis. They're so embedded, and it's so monstrous. It's utterly monstrous to say that.
Sure, but we can't ignore that. We can't ignore the progress that's getting made every day, Lawrence. So we can't ignore the amount of doctors, some of my own doctors who were against it 2 years ago, who now are ready to go, hey, guess what I learned?
Right.
And they're looking into it. There's a lot of that going on.
Right. Well, think about it this way. I'm not a medical doctor, right? My training is, a completely different type of training, right? And I basically sat down starting in late 2017 and started to read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of medical journal articles about cannabis. And so an MD should be able to suck up that information pretty quickly. And there's doctor's guides. Canada has a 150-page physician's guide to cannabis. They're out there. So, any doctor who's conscientiously interested in recommending out of their own initiative, they should learn these things.
And so that's where I'm at with it. The doctors will figure this out on their own. And I also think that as long as we're not putting anything on us, meaning I could go in there and fake a sprained toe and still get this. So as long as not putting anything on us, I don't think we need to be putting anything on the doctors to write the recommendations. It's just my opinion. All right, let's move on to something else.
I think there's a professional expectation that a doctor only practices in the areas that he knows about.
Okay, let's move on to something else. We're already about 25 minutes into it here. Let's, you've got a list, I think you wanted to show us of some of the good stuff in, what is this, in the full access petition? Is that right?
Yeah, there's a few other positives in the medical petition that I don't have on this list. I could call up my list of the medical ones, but basically all the rights and protections for people in the medical and the full access are almost identical. There's only a couple extra things in the medical that just don't apply to full access. Like, for instance, ensuring that children in schools who have a medical need for cannabis have a way to get that cannabis, right? That's in the medical petition, but not in the full access one. But what I have here, let's just screen share it. Where's my cursor? There's my cursor. Screen share. And so just, there's all this good and bad in the petitions. There's things that I think some people will agree with and things that some people will disagree with. There's issues of controversy, but I don't want to kind of get lost in the discussion that there's a lot of stuff in there that really is important for actual real human beings who are living in a world where law enforcement and the institutions of power are still trying to ruin your life because of cannabis, right? Cannabis is still scandalized, right, through our country, through our world. And our employers, the police, judges, and so on often have very negative attitudes that we have to protect ourselves against. So here's just a list of some of the things that these petitions both have that give us protections that we currently don't have. So first of all, right now, it's still a misdemeanor for a person to be in possession of cannabis without a patient card. 4,000 to 6,000 people every year since 788. It was more prior to 788, but since 788, 4,000 to 6,000 people continue to get charged criminally with possession. So it's a $400 fine and a misdemeanor. And so both the medical and the full access get rid of that. In the medical, it gets rid of the misdemeanor. It turns it into a $400 fine, and that fine could be withdrawn if you get a patient card within 45 days of the fine. That's the way the medical does it. The way the full access does it is it's just legal for everybody 21 and older. So it's no longer at all criminal for you to possess cannabis, for you to grow cannabis, for you to share cannabis. That's legalized also in the full access. So you can pass a joint in the full access. So that's number one change in law that currently we don't have that we need to have. Next one is it's illegal for everybody out there who uses cannabis to drive. It is illegal for you to drive. To have a THC metabolite in your system means that according to law, you are impaired. And so one of the other things that this does is THC metabolites in your system will have absolutely zero legal bearing whatsoever. Won't be in any way evidentially relevant for claims of impairment. It won't impact anything in your life. Employment, driving, family court, whatever it is. Now, active THC, not a metabolite, but active THC. This is a controversial one, and we're kind of, the language is kind of in between, I think, what the community wants and sort of other issues. Many people in the community, if they're regular cannabis users, will not experience any kind of cognitive impairment from the use of cannabis because they use it often enough and their body's gotten used to it. But of course, that's not the case with everybody. So the way the petitions are written, both of them, is that there is no presumption of impairment for active THC. So if they were to do a blood test and find THC in your system, let's say you're in a car accident and they want to see if you're impaired, they can do the blood test, get the active THC, but it won't presume impairment. They can't charge you for impairment based upon the active THC in your system. What will be required to establish impairment is cognitive, kinetic, or behavioral tests. They can, however, enter in as evidence that you also have active THC. And that's not optimal from the perspective of many people in the community. But the thought is that there are people who do get high and drive, and their driving will get impacted from that THC in their system. So the thought is there'll be too much pushback from law enforcement and employers and so on if there were an accident that occurred and they were worried that somebody was really cognitively impaired from the THC, they would have no recourse. So this is in between. Next one, and this is a big one. No employer, including safety-sensitive employers, may refuse to hire you or discipline you or terminate you based upon off-work cannabis use. So they can't terminate you if you're using cannabis outside the workplace. The only thing they could do, a safety-sensitive employer, what they could do is they could say, you can't be high, you can't be under the influence, you can't consume it at work, right? So a safety-sensitive employer could say, here's our policy, no consumption at work, but they cannot regulate in any way what you do outside of work. Next one. Currently, as many of you know, physicians deny treatment to people who use cannabis. Pain management doctors will terminate you or they won't prescribe to you. This happens in psychiatry and oncology and other fields. Doctors will refuse you as a patient or refuse to prescribe to you, prescribe scheduled medications if you use cannabis for no legal reason, for no medical reason. It's just there's this myth out there and fear out there. And the fear is not completely irrational on the part of pain management doctors who are under such scrutiny, but they're erring so far on the side of caution that they'll just terminate you if you are a cannabis user. Well, what this does is it says doctors can't do that to patients, and it gives them legal protection both at the state and federal level through a kind of trick. It says that the local standard of care will be such that a physician can treat you, can prescribe to you, irrespective of whether or not you use cannabis. The reason why that has federal bearing is because if a federal prosecutor wanted to charge a local doctor, they have to follow the local standard of care. That's well established. So if a federal prosecutor wanted to prosecute a doctor in Oklahoma, they would have to use the Oklahoma standards to show whether or not the doctor is consistent or outside of that standard of care. So we're going to put it into legal, right into legal framework, that's what the standard of care is. I helped work on Senate Bill 57, which pertains to prescribing within pain management. And we did the same thing there. We define the standard of care within pain management in such a way that it gives state doctors protection against federal prosecutors. Next, we've heard a few stories recently about women being charged with child endangerment when they tested the umbilical cord and found THC in it. That's going to get rid of that. There is no presumption of endangerment or abuse or neglect on the basis of a pregnant woman or parent, for that matter, using cannabis. If they want to charge somebody with abuse or neglect, it can't be solely based upon the presence of THC. I already went over this concerning DUIs. Another big thing is lots of people end up back in jail for violating parole or probation for the use of cannabis, right? So they get out of jail, they use some cannabis, they go see their parole officer. Their parole officer has them do a urine test, they find THC, they put them back in jail. It's happening to many, many people. We hear many instances of it. So what this does is they can't revoke parole or probation or bail for the use of cannabis. Another one, recently, about 3 weeks ago, a state appellate court said that having a patient card does not exempt you from detention or search, so that if a law enforcement officer were to pull you over and see that you have, like, a bag of cannabis that you just bought at a dispensary or whatever, sitting inside your car somewhere, they would be fully within their power, according to that court, to detain you and to search you, because that court said that there is a historical association between cannabis use and criminal conduct. So it gave law enforcement probable cause. This will change that. That law enforcement will not be to detain you or search you based upon the smell or observed presence of cannabis. Local governments cannot charge or restrict home grow, which there's a little bit of wiggle room in current law, and some jurisdictions like Paul's Valley are trying to do that. This would stop it. Broadly, local governments in no way whatsoever could interfere with the rights of patients, and that would include, like the next line, they cannot interfere with your use of cannabis. It'll basically just follow the rules for tobacco. So if you're smoking or vaping cannabis, it'll be set in stone, just follows the rules for tobacco. Obviously, if you're eating a gummy or whatever, then there's nothing they could do to prevent that, right? That's the same as just eating a candy. And then the last thing is, even though it would create a 15% excise tax for non-patients, for people without a card, it would drop the excise tax for people with a card for patients down to 0%. So no doubt about it, there's lots of stuff that are debatable and controversial and things that we would disagree with in one or the other of the petitions. Absolutely. But I think it's important for us to realize that however far along we've gotten so far with 788, the legacy of a century of prohibition still impacts the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Basically, 500,000 people, roughly all the cannabis users in this state, are still vulnerable to DUIs, vulnerable to losing their job, vulnerable to government taking away their children, and so on. And this, in every way that we could imagine, would treat cannabis as tomatoes from the perspective of law enforcement and our employers and our doctors and so on.
So where the controversy starts is, and where we have some disagreements in also what's in that petition. That's all great stuff. Those are all dreams of ours to solve all those problems. I would hope that any petition that moves forward addresses the things on that list. Those are all great things. I don't believe that. I think some of this is just minor technicalities. Like, I think the taxes is too high. I understand how you talk about, well, I don't see that on here, but you talked about bringing it down by replacing it with an export tax over time once the federal government changes. Is that still in there?
So yeah, the way Jed has it written is
it in there? Is it in there or not?
Halfway. It's yes and no. I'd have to say yes to part of what you said and no to the other part of what you said.
Okay, well, it doesn't really matter that much, because my point is still the same. I don't think that's the way to do it. I think that we need a lower tax from the beginning, which makes us more attractive to the states around us and keeps us attractive to other states after the federal government does something. This 15% is great for a couple years, but if we were to do, say, 7 to 10%, I believe that could bring in an enormously larger amount of money over a longer period of time, because it would encourage more people to come here. I realize we've had this talk before. You think maybe the taxes wouldn't be that much of a difference for someone to drive across the state, but I know of busloads of people that drive down to Texas, to Dallas on one time during once a year to buy school clothes, because they get them. There's some time when they get them tax free. So yes, people will make those trips to save on taxes. And I think making this lower in the beginning makes us more attractive in the long run, without all that stuff about using the export tax to bring it down. If you want to explain that, you go ahead.
Yeah, so the presumption is that federal law is going to change at some point, and Oklahoma will be able to export cannabis. And so, rather than our being an oil exporter, we could also be a cannabis exporter. And there's a gross production tax on oil. So Jed added a gross production tax on cannabis, so that when federal law changes, then there would be a tax on what's exported, not what's here locally, but anything that's exported. Then there would be, I think it's a 3% wholesale tax on whatever is exported. Doesn't lower though the retail tax though.
Do any other states? Well, I guess we don't know yet. We won't know till the federal government changes. I'm wondering what other states are thinking, if they're thinking of an export tax when that happens. The idea of an export
I think it's very
concerns me because I don't want to set our farmers up, with a deficit right off the bat of 3% to go into a national market.
so, I think you're making a fair point. I'd have to go back and look to see whether or not the legislature could change it. They probably can, like almost everything in there. That's a set numerical value. It always says the legislature can come back and change it. So, if it turns out that 3% makes Oklahoma less competitive, then that could be changed. My guess is that the cost for production for cannabis here in Oklahoma would be among the lowest in the country. The cost for electricity here is among the lowest in the country, cost for land and water and so on, especially by comparison to a place like California. So I'm not sure if that 3% would have much of an impact, but at the same time, it should be flexible.
Yeah, and I agree that it will be cheaper to produce here, but what I'm saying is that's an unknown market, and we're already earmarking, tagging on 3%. It's just concerning. That's all. Just concerning. It could be worse.
Yeah, sure, fair point. Yeah.
But and then the other thing that's a big deal that I know we've talked about this one till we're blue in the face. I think we've been arguing about this since Saturday. And this is the idea of caps. And you saw the reaction from everybody Saturday.
Chanting, no caps, no caps. Yes.
Yes, they chanted it more than once. I went back and watched the show, everything that streamed out again. And I got to the end part and I wasn't in the room during the end. I went outside and I heard him chanting again on the tape. I saw him chanting again. So you got two chants of no caps with a room full of people. And I think that while all that great stuff that we just went over is all important and necessary, I worry we put it at risk by adding caps. And as you say yourself, the caps are such a high number that it really won't affect the market anyway. Well, it will, but down the road, maybe. So
it'll affect the market. The question is to what extent and in what way and for how long. And there's a lot of uncertainty. So I think one aspect of it is the actual economic model, to debate the actual economic model. Another issue is just the principle of the matter, right? And so people who are just staunch free marketeers say no caps. People who say, look, Oklahoma is known, right, as the free market state for cannabis, and this would take away from that, right? So there's undoubtedly, right, solid points of concern and objection to caps, no doubt about it. And then when it comes to the economic model, I have talked to quite a few industry experts, attorneys, business people, and so forth about the caps, and people that are both highly regarded people. I get opposite views. Some people love them, some people hate them. And that's based upon a theory of what the caps are going to do. And so, it's all conjecture. Like in principle, you could oppose them, sure. But in terms of if you're an economist coming up with a theoretical analysis of what those caps are going to do, here's my guess. You want to tell me this is what my guess is. First of all, we have 20 times more dispensaries per capita than in California. We have a vast number of dispensaries. We have almost 2,500 dispensaries. Nevada has 70 dispensaries, right? We have a ridiculously extreme number of dispensaries. Many of them regularly go out of business. Pardon me?
Maybe we could let them borrow some dispensaries.
Yeah.
It sounds like they need some. I hate to hear 70.
Right. So kind of capping the number at 2,500, capping the number of dispensaries at 2,500 is kind of like capping them at 25 million. It's such a number way beyond what the market could bear. Now, let me just be clear. The way Jed has this written, it doesn't cap medical. doesn't cap medical dispensaries, doesn't cap grows, doesn't cap processors. All that it does is it says that there'll be a full access recreational permit issued to all existing dispensaries. That permit will be free. They'll get it automatically. It'll be good for a year plus any duration after that that is on their license. And then after that, they have to pay, I think it's $250, I think, for it. So
but it's limited. So let me tell you what happens. It's limited. You've got a dispensary across the street from my dispensary, but I have one of those limited licensing. You get to sell to 10% of the people that drive up and down the street, because 10%, almost 10% have a card. I get to sell to everybody. So I'm going to sell at $2 less per gram than you do for infinity until you're out of business. And I've got 10 times more customers, guaranteeing that it won't take me long. I'll buy it. I'll buy in bigger batches, so I'll get better prices. I'll kill you in the market. I'll kill you in the market. So putting a cap on recreational or full access is putting out of business the medical stores. There will be no medical stores left.
Right. In the situation where you have two dispensaries in close proximity, one is medical and full access. The full access one will, in all likelihood, outcompete the medical one. Absolutely. So what if every dispensary, though, had both licenses? Then it's just the same. It's one competing against the other. Right. So the question then is, if you cap the licenses at 1 million, everybody's going to have both, right? If you cap the permits, I should say, at 1 million, everybody's going to have a permit. If you cap the permits at 5,000, everybody's going to have a permit. If you cap the permit at the existing number of dispensaries plus any of those in queue, almost everybody's going to have both. Part of the reason why is, this is my guess, let's say this passes with the caps in it. Let's say it passes November 2022, it passes. From November 6th or whatever, 2022 until January 1st, right? Or whatever it is that this goes into effect. Guess what's going to happen? There's going to be thousands of new applicants. Everybody who was thinking about opening a dispensary. And so one of the attorneys that I talked to, he said this: I have lots of clients that might own 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 dispensaries and have the hope of owning a dozen dispensaries. And if there's going to be a cap on permits, his clients are probably just going to go ahead and file for their medical dispensary licenses and get their permits before it's too late. And then they'll just delay it as long as they can until they actually open up. So there's a scenario, at least that attorney is imagining, that they'll end up being not 2,500 permits. Basically, the number, we have 2,350 dispensaries or something like that right now, plus a few in queue, but there'll be another 1,000 or more of people rushing to the gate before it closes. And so we'll have, out of the 2,500 permits that we have right now, or out of the 2,500 dispensary licenses that we have right now, only like 1,800 are actually operational. So close to 700 haven't come into operation. If this passes, it'll be more like 1,700. So there'll be all these extra licenses and permits that are just waiting until market forces justify their being open. So I kind of wonder about this. I kind of wonder whether or not, if you in principle object to permits, you have a good reason to object, right? If you are libertarian, if you take pride in the free market approach, there's a good reason to object. If you're an economic theorist, you might say it's not going to matter one bit, because there's going to be such a glut of those permits out there that anybody who wants one will be able to get one. And as dispensaries go out of business, there'll be more and more. Because if we went full access, the presumption is that we already have such an excess. I forget what it is. I can look it up right now. In Colorado, right? And so Colorado caters to so many of the states around them. Colorado has 572 dispensaries Colorado has 572 dispensaries with 50% more population than what we have. We have 5 times more dispensaries in Colorado right
let
now.
me give you something you haven't touched on here. Let me tell you how the activist feels about it, okay? Because I don't give a shit about the economists. I really don't. Not when it comes to this, and I'm not one to cuss on my show, so there must be something up here if I'm going to say that. But the way I see it, all the people that pushed for 788, all the people that are in business now or hoping to be in the future, all did this with this free market idea. I've interviewed both Chip and Jed, and had both them in the conversation put business needs before the patient needs, for people's right to go into business before everything else. So if that's the case, the idea of putting caps now, to me, makes anyone who's for caps that pushed this originally a hypocrite. It makes them a hypocrite. We did not push for caps. We did not do 788 so some people could make money, so we could rig this for some people who could get in the first 2 or 3 years. Not only can we produce it cheaper here, but as we're seeing, Oklahoma has an enormous influx of people. We have land like nobody else's business. We have open land. We could continue to grow our population, and we're trapped on a number. It's counter to everything. It turns my stomach. It upsets me in a great way. The thought of caps and the thought that some businesses would encourage that idea now that they're in the game makes me angry. It makes me very angry that they would be hypocrites like that.
Right. So if you're currently a business owner, then the caps are likely to benefit you because it blocks further competition. And it means that when you want to get out of the business, you have a golden parachute, right? Assuming this cap is worth something, assuming that your permit is worth something, then you could sell off that permit and reduce whatever debt you might be in when you decide to go out of business, right? So the permits might look very attractive to current people in business, right? It gives them an asset they currently don't have, and in theory, it could limit their competition. But if there's more than enough permits to go around, that's a pipe dream. Because if there's more than enough permits to go around, that permit may not be worth anything more than what you paid for it.
Right. Brad
So
said something.
the idea is,
look, Brad said something here that I think is relevant. Cap a taco place. Point being, you try and put caps on a taco place, all the people that own the taco stands are going to be quite happy with that. But everybody who wants tacos is going to be pissed off. Well, I don't have a taco stand. Maybe someday I'll want one. Yeah. And I want to be able to get tacos on every street corner. So I don't like taco caps.
So one point of objection is, why should we put into the Constitution something that picks winners and losers? And why should we put in something into the Constitution that says, you guys at the front of the line, here, we're going to give you this freebie. You pay the $250 for your permit. And if everything works out, that permit might be worth $50,000. Woohoo, you're in the money, right? Should we do that in our Constitution? Shouldn't the law be impartial between people of today and people in the future? So this is part of the in principle objection to it. The other issue I think that you were speaking to with regards to, what's the reason for 788? You and I both devoted much of our lives to getting 788 passed, right? We were active every day in our personal respects, doing everything we could to help get it passed. I didn't do it in any regard whatsoever for business. Not to say I'm against business, it just wasn't my thing. I did it because I believe that prohibition is immoral. I believe that we should have a right to control our own bodies. I believe in the medical value of cannabis and everybody should have access to it. And I think that the social harms of the war on drugs are unbelievably awful beyond almost any other mistake any country in history has ever made. And so it has to end. And so then the idea that we're going to jeopardize all the progress that I listed out, right? All those points that I listed out by something that is as debatable and controversial and riles some people so much as caps. We're putting all the social justice at risk for the sake of a business tweak. I think
and my thinking is if all that social justice stuff is so important to everybody, not just us, but everybody else, Why would they tank it with stuff they know it's going to send people's blood pressure through the roof?
Right. On the other hand, Jed holds to the thesis that caps are going to be popular among the general electorate, and it'll help get this passed. So the thesis there is that a lot of people in Oklahoma feel like we have it's too much already. All this cannabis stuff, there's too much of it. And if we cap the dispensaries, then what we're saying to these people, look, all we're doing is we're taking the existing dispensaries and we're letting them sell to people 21 and older. Don't worry about any more dispensaries. We're just saying the current dispensaries are going to be allowed to, basically stabilize themselves economically. And, the rest of the country is going full access anyhow. So let's do it too. That's part of his rationale. So it's not necessarily that it's just like, oh, well, all that social justice stuff is just basically the vehicle for really a business strategy. It's that he also thinks that all that social justice stuff won't get passed without the caps. But that's speculative, right? That's speculative.
Yeah, that's a political look. That's a political
way.
gamble, and that's a political gamble, and I completely disagree. I think the exact opposite. I think that putting that in there sets off enough people that are watching this right now to cause an issue. So you're never going to get to those people that he's talking about getting, because he's not going to get past these people.
I asked my wife.
I also want to address something else. You said why you did this and it had nothing to do with business. Well, I didn't do this to go into business, okay? But I did listen to, when I rode around on my motorcycle the state and registered people to vote and talk to them, I did listen to people talk to me about wanting to go into business. And I knew people, or I know people who are living in situations where they're like on their family farm, and it used to be 100 acres and they've been selling it off. A generation sells off 10 here, next generation sells off 10 there. They're down to a few acres. They're putting their damn social security checks together to get a license when we first passed this, and they're trying to start a commercial grow. I also did it to help them. And when I started pushing, because everybody needs to understand this, when I first started pushing full access, the last day of session of 2019, it was because those people needed more customers. It was because it was the only way they were going to survive, because we saw the number of stores climbing so fast. But I don't think caps is a solution. I think we just need to open the doors and then let the market sort itself out. And I worry all that social justice stuff that you and I love, that you gave that list of, is all in jeopardy because of caps. I think the medical one is in jeopardy because of things like the doctor license. I think the full access one is in jeopardy because of caps.
I just sort of anecdotally, I asked my wife about caps, and she is not involved in economic theory. She's a ballet professor, but I asked her what she thought about the caps thing, and she was opposed to it. And I think it's going to just reflect a lot of people's attitudes. Just let the market settle itself out. Don't try to artificially, engineer anything. And so I think some people are going to feel that way. But the problem is, it is going to be mixed. Some people are going to say, ideologically, I'm totally opposed to it. Some people say, I'm only going to accept this if you limit the businesses. Some people are going to say, look, all this other good is outweighed by the caps. Some people say the caps outweigh all this other good. There's going to be the whole spectrum out there politically. And I just don't know. I just don't know.
Okay, so let's ask the 18 people that are watching right now. Do you guys think it would be a good idea if this is going to stay this way, that perhaps we work towards multiple petitions to choose from when it comes to the ballot box? What do you guys think about that? Maybe we need to collect signatures on a bunch of petitions and let the state decide on that day. I could go along with that. I could sign this one if I'm also out collecting signatures for one that doesn't have the caps in it, and then we can all decide when it gets to the ballot box. I'd sign them all if we're going to do that. But right now I have real concerns, real fear for all that social justice stuff, because we're trying to appease people we're not even going to get to, because we're going to piss off all the home team before we get started.
Yep. And at the same time, there are people who don't want the social justice that we're talking about, that maybe we're giving too much protection to the cannabis user. Some people will feel that way, that it's like, you're not going, I won't vote for this because you're limiting testing on DUIs. There'll be people out there who won't like the petition for that reason too, right? So there's going to be lots of people coming up with this or that reason. And there might be somebody who'd say, look, they like the caps and they don't like the social justice. We have this, like, people are different. And, what we need is really rich, detailed polling to get some answers. And, we crafted this out of our own principles of commitment, more so than, political calculations, with maybe just a couple exceptions. But as you're saying, Chris, maybe an alternative is, look, we have one version with caps, one version without caps.
Yeah. What? Yeah. I mean, everybody
I
here.
sent you that version earlier today.
What's that?
I sent you that version earlier today.
I know, but we don't want to. I want to get everybody on board before we start throwing a bunch of crazy out there. I want to keep it somewhat sane. So I want everybody to tell us.
What would this look like?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm sorry, but you asked me, what would this look like without caps, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, what would it look like if we didn't have 15% tax, but 10% tax? So all these things are malleable, right? All these things are malleable.
Yeah. Another change we talked about was, instead of the 3 steps down to the zero tax, it's just 6 months. The tax is cut in half. Another 6 months of the tax is at zero. And that's on the patient cards after full access starts, for those that are wondering.
Mm-hmm.
Just another way of doing it. I thought it'd be easier for everybody. All right. Well, we've been going just over an hour, so I want to go ahead and wrap it up. I think this has been a pretty good conversation. I'm afraid at this point, we're just going to argue back and forth and not make any more accomplishments forward. I think we've come up with some good ideas here. We've suggested everybody tell us if you think we should have multiple petitions, because I don't want to offend a bunch of people here. And if we roll out something else, I don't want everybody thinking we're trying to steal the limelight. I want to know what everybody thinks. Would you vote for this with caps in it? Or would you rather have one next to it that doesn't have caps? That's about it. So what do you think, Lawrence? You want to wrap it up? Go ahead.
I think that I understand the people who have principled commitments to caps. I prefer the free market settling things. I like the idea that Oklahoma has gained this reputation of being this free market approach, and this would kind of cut it back a bit. I like the idea also of all these existing businesses trying to help them out and stabilize their situation, because of all those people who wanted to go into a dispensary and then got in over their heads. And so it's kind of generous to find a way to help them. But at the same time, I'm not comfortable with the idea of locking things in such a way that's to the detriment of somebody in the future. But my position actually is the cap number is so high, it is going to create volatility for about 6 months. And then we're still good. And then basically the outcome after that is of almost no consequence to whether or not there's caps. The main opposition to caps is the ideal of a free market. I think that's it, because I think that the rest of it, the economic models, are such that they're either just too speculative or, involve parameters outside of the mere fact of caps.
Okay, I want to take a minute to thank everybody. I'm looking at you guys' comments. Thank everybody for participating in this. I really do. Frank, thank you for watching. Johnny, appreciate you. Jules, everybody, I appreciate it. I even saw on here, where's his name? Donnie. I see Donnie's watching. He's in no caps also. So thank you, Donnie. Donnie, what do you think about multiple petitions? And do you want to meet up later this week and talk about one?
Yeah.
All right, guys, that's going to be it for now. We're a night late. We were going to do this last night, but I kind of needed a break. It was a heavy weekend. Saturday was a little bit rough doing that meeting, and then a little argument going on after that between everybody. So I just needed a break. But we will do this again on Thursday. How many of these we do about the petitions is going to depend on how long it takes before they're filed. And that's going to depend on you guys. I guess if you can cause enough of a ruckus, maybe he'll rethink the caps and the doctor license on that one. And maybe he'll rethink the whole thing. Who knows? It's up to you
Yeah,
guys.
just one last thing is that these documents, in somewhat less refined forms, but these documents have been out for over a month. The medical for over a month, the full access for nearly a month. And there really has not been that much feedback. I've received, I think, most of that feedback. Jed has sent me good chunks of feedback now and then that we went through. But my sense is there's not a lot of feedback coming in. And so the whole ideal here with the public comment is this is grassroots. This is what we as a people, this community want to see happen. And so if you do have views on this or that aspect of one or the other petition, please do communicate it. Again, it's orcaok.com.
All right, folks, that's going to be it for now. We're going to wrap it up until Thursday. If a couple of you want to join us on Thursday to talk about this, let me know. We'll set that up. That's it for now. Till next time, stay grumpy. I'll see you on the road.